If everyone please take your seat, we will begin the fourth meeting of the 2022 Interim Joint Committee on Education. We ask that each of you silence your cell phones in order to avoid interruption. I think we have some more members coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Mariah, if you will, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll, Senator Gibbons, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Higdon, Senator Kerr, Senator Meredith, Senator Neal, Senator Southworth, Senator Stivers, Senator Thomas, Senator West, Senator Wilson, here. Representative Baker, present. Representative Banta,
Present.
Representative Bojanowski, present. Representative Decker, Representative Donahue,
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Dossett, Representative Hart,
Here.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative Massey, Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative McCoy,
Here.
Representative Miller, Representative Gibbons Prunty, Representative Rayburn, Representative Riley,
Here.
Representative Scott, Representative Timoney,
Here.
Representative Tipton,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Representative Wilner,
Here.
Co-Chair Wise, Chair Huff.
Present. Co-Chair Wise will be here. He's just running a little late. Does any members have anyone they want to introduce or recognize today? If not, I would like to take this opportunity. This is my last opportunity to chair the House Education Committee, and it has been an honor and a privilege to serve in this capacity. When you've been an educator for 27 years and then you have the opportunity to affect policy, it's really just a true honor, because I sit there forever, those 27 years, thinking they don't have a clue what they're doing up there. And then I got up here, and sometimes I still thought they don't have a clue what they're doing up here. But I just want to share with you that it's been a true privilege to serve in this capacity and to work with the people I have been able to work with. Mariah and Joe Carroll here, they are exceptional. This woman is an institution of knowledge, and she has been my saving grace through this whole experience. I wish that we had been able to do policy that would have had more effect on special education. Is something near and dear to my heart. But we had, the pandemic, school safety, things that took priority within our agenda each and every month, that some things that I would have liked to have seen happen got away from us. But I have had people reach out, so I may not be finished in capacity with working with educators and affecting policy later. But I just wanted to share with you what a privilege it's been to serve. Our next order of business, we need a motion to accept the minutes from the Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Well, we have our first presenters, I think, already at the table. Thank you for being so punctual. They're going to share anti-vaping efforts in schools with us. I know this is something that's really, really taken a priority in addressing throughout the Commonwealth, as far as especially middle and high. And I also have had a lot of reach out to me about the Delta 8 and Delta 9, the gummies that are being brought to school and shared. So we have another issue that is hampering the learning process in the schools and the safety of children. So I appreciate you bringing this forward today. If you would, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chairwoman Huff. I'm Representative Mark Hart, 78th House District. With me, I have the honor of having Master Sergeant Brian Milton, United States Marine Corps, retired, the NJROTC instructor from Pendleton County High School. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to him and let him make the presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this opportunity and giving your time here this morning to hear me out. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start this presentation by sharing here on the Zoom meeting. All right. So, by way of introduction, again, thank you, Representative Hart, for this opportunity. My name is Brian Melton, and like he said, I'm a retired Marine. I retired in 2018 and started teaching at a high school in northern Kentucky. During that time, it built a rapport and reputation with students and started finding out some of the loopholes that they were kind of slipping through and some things that needed some attention. So I started reaching out to our representatives for some help. One of the biggest challenges we're having and actually starts in middle school is the popularity with these vaping devices. So I started reaching out to Mr. Hart for some help. I wanted to put forth an effort to recognize that we need more protection for our youth and our educators. Because as I started peeling this back, I started realizing there was a lot more to vaping devices than nicotine and THC. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and proceed here. This first quote in the opening slide, it says it's part of the game, a game where they make lots of money and teens become addicted. That's a quote from Hannah Walker from American Heart Association. She's referencing how vaping devices are made to attract the youth. They're flavored, they're colorful, they mimic many devices, which you'll see here shortly, which may be shocking. Quickly cover the rising popularity and trends, some of the devious designs that are out there on the market, the administrative challenges that we face in the school systems, and some states that we may be able to emulate their laws of. According to the USDA, there's more than 2.5 million kids that are currently using these e-cigarettes. 25% of those are using them daily. Majority of these cigarettes or vaping devices are flavored, which again draws to the attraction of the youth. The new Minnesota data also shows that about 1 in 5 Minnesota students, nearly 78% of them, reported using that tobacco products, and the first ones they ever tried were flavored. So it shows that the manufacturers of these devices are gearing them toward the youth in the flavored and attractiveness of those devices. The Minnesota Health Department reported that 1 in 5 high school students are using e-cigarettes. 70% of those high school students reported using those, and they started showing signs of nicotine dependence. Nicotine is known to disrupt brain development, lead to addiction, and disrupt those learning, attention and learning habits. This can increase the students' depression and anxiety, and medical treatment facilities at this time are currently operating at full capacity and or turning away some of our youth. The Sun and Brook are facing staffing problems, and it creates even more urgency that we need to take action to get these young folks some extra help. Underage users will be met with plausible deniability. By that, what I'm referring to is the federal law that says cigarettes and nicotine devices cannot be sold to those under the age of 21. So when or in the event they develop health problems, the manufacturers of those devices are going to say, well, the law says you shouldn't be using them anyway. In those rising trends, we'll see that the health department here has reported that in 3 years, high school students using vaping devices nearly doubled. Some of the stats show that from middle school to high school, from 2017 to 2020, there are staggering numbers and increasing numbers of use of vaping devices that contain marijuana or THC. And it doesn't stop with the THC contents. Vape pens have been found to contain marijuana, THC, heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, which I discovered is 100 times more potent than fentanyl, and CBDs. It's Russian roulette. These kids are getting these devices from friends and acquaintances, people they think they can trust, and they don't know what is actually in the dab or the actual device. We had a student of mine actually used the device, fell violently ill. It come to find out it was a THC device, and it was heavily laced with THC. This was a video I was hoping everyone would be able to see. I understand we can't broadcast it. It's not wanting to work with the Zoom meeting. But if you have a chance to watch this, you will see that there are devices that are being manufactured that mimic thumb drives, ink pens, even hoodie strings. These students are actually able to sneak these in and hide them in plain sight to use these devices, which makes it even more challenging for administrators and staff members to pick out what these students are using. So we need something that says these things will not be tolerated. Some examples there. You can see it's hard to pick out what the devices actually are. We have some that are highlighters, mimic makeup devices, and even computer devices, thumb drives, and things of that nature. Some of the data I collected in-house from 2021 to 22, the referrals by grade, we see a very heavy influx of referrals or discrepancies with our ninth graders. That is because if you look back at the earlier data that shows the usage of these increasing in 7th and 8th graders or middle schoolers is on the rise, which obviously will push up those numbers for our freshmen, 9th grade students. They kind of start weaning off a little bit as the students get older. Maybe it's because they're realizing these devices are dangerous, or they're just not using them where we can catch them. Looking at some of the bills there that have been passed, the House Bill 11 that was passed in 2019, from my understanding, Section 4 of that, a person in violation of the subsection there of the policies, it's up to the Board of Education for how that should be handled. It leaves the punishment up to the schools, and it really omits the ban for the staff and faculty, so it takes away from that. That's really not the case of importance, but what it does do is it leaves it up to the school districts to define what their policy is, and I think we would benefit from having something from the state that says any device, a vaping device, would have a harsher punishment or a fine associated with having on school campus. Recently, the city of Dayton, Kentucky imposed punishments and fines for the use of vaping devices, and those violations are actually harsher on the adults using them in public in the city of Dayton than what we have in place to protect our youth. And House Bill 215, this is one of the loopholes when we look back at some of the chemicals that are being added to the vaping devices. It raised the minimum time served from 50 to 85% for fentanyl-laced or for fentanyl offenses, but it actually leaves out fentanyl-laced vaping devices. It's not addressed in the bill. Statutes require that offenses before an 18th birthday must be held in juvenile court. Therefore, the law would only impact adult staff or students. So we may need to revisit that and, again, find some deterrents that would be put into place to encourage our youth not to be using these devices. Some of the administrative challenges that schools are facing. First, the training our faculty on the positive identification of vapes. One of the biggest challenges is it's hard to see if it's a highlighter or if it's an actual vape device. Is it a hoodie string or is it a vape device that mimics a hoodie string? So that takes time and it takes a watchful eye. Disseminating the staff to ensure adequate campus supervision. These kids are in the hallways, they're in the bathrooms, lunchrooms, and it's not uncommon for a student to pull out a vape device, take a hit or drag from it, blow it into their shirt or whatever because the vapors disseminate so quickly, and they go on about their business. So it's hard to keep an eye on all these students all the time. And then also we need to focus on protecting our staff and our students from exposure to those illicit drugs. Don't quote me on this, but I think the state of Tennessee had a incident where a staff member, maybe a school nurse, had received a fentanyl-laced vape device. Both she and 2 SRO deputies were placed in the hospital from fentanyl exposure. We need to train our staff on how to respond to vape-induced medical emergencies. Some of the THC-laced vaping devices are so heavily concentrated, one hit, one drag will put a student in a subconscious state of mind. It induces vomiting, nausea, and a situation that our staff and schools are going to have to overcome. An investment of time in processing disciplinary actions and infractions. Right now, many of the school districts have these devices falling under the nicotine policies, which vaping is not all just nicotine, as we realize. And we have to educate our students on the dangers of vaping. As I mentioned earlier, most schools have folded the e-cigarettes into their anti-tobacco policies, which some of those may include punishment in detention or a letter sent home and a tobacco education class. Some of the uniform punishments that we could start looking at mimicking or emulating or Florida, which poses some pretty harsh punishments, and community service for an anti-vaping program. Nebraska has actually classified it as a class 5 misdemeanor. And according to the Michigan District Health Department, the United States is facing an epidemic of electronic cigarettes as they become more popular. In the state of Michigan, vaping consequences may include up to a $2,500 fine based on the level of offenses. And minors attempting to purchase vape devices are also facing fines, educational health risk, and community service. Another state that has some pretty impressive anti-vaping policies is the state of Texas. E-cigarettes there, or vapor products, are prohibited at school and or after school activities, and those are punishable by a fine of up to $100. If traces of THC are inside the vape pen, the juvenile will face drug charges and could be a Class C misdemeanor with fines up to $500, probation, and rehabilitation. Many states I've found that have group vaping devices in with drug paraphernalia. Those include North Carolina, New Jersey, Washington, and Connecticut. And that would include any and all types of vaping devices. Recently, a Beasley Allen law firm took aim at one of the manufacturers of vaping devices, Juul, to hold them accountability for the youth vaping epidemic, which that resulted in the Juul manufacturer being pretty much dissolved, but that left the door wide open for other manufacturers to come in and take up where they left off. We did have 13 school districts in the state of Kentucky that were included in that lawsuit. And I feel, though, that the state of Kentucky needs to take the lead and set the precedence in combating the epidemic, work cohesively on a uniform policy dealing with vaping and drug-laced vape products. This will help give the school districts a stronger backing for implementing harsher punishments, maybe even possibly allocate funding for anti-vaping education, and help us to tighten up the fight on addiction, focus on bringing down addiction rates, and fight back against the manufacturing of devious designs that these kids are being targeted with. Those are just some of the examples of the vaping devices that I see pretty often, some that just continuously blend in with normal everyday items that these students bring into school with them every day.
At this time, we'll open it up for any questions from anybody.
Thank you, and thank you for that in-depth presentation. We do have a couple of questions. Representative Tipton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Hart, and Sergeant Milton. I thank you for bringing this presentation forward. This is an issue that has been brought to my attention. I think a lot of people do not understand the seriousness of this issue in our schools. It causes, when a school staff is having to focus on these vaping devices, it's a disruption. I know that at 12:01 last night, KDE released publicly our K-Prep scores for the state. This is just another disruption to the educational process, and that's an issue besides the health concerns. Especially, we talk about fentanyl and carfentanil, people die from that. And we have to take this very seriously. Representative Hart, I don't know what your intentions are a session, but I'm more than willing to work with you and see if we can move forward in a positive way on this, and I appreciate your presentation.
Yeah, right now we're in the process of drafting legislation, which I hope to have ready and available to be filed first of January. So look forward to the help from Representative Tipton or anybody that would like to help and have some input in the actual legislation.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a really serious health and safety issue, and so thank you for shining a light on it. I'm interested to know the states that you put up as examples, that they've got the harsher penalties and the fines and so forth. Are we seeing a correlation with a reduction in incidents in those states where the policies are harsher?
Ma'am, actually, I was not able to retract or pull that data. I would have to actually start reaching out to some of those schools and school districts in those states to see some of the positive data. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
I was just curious about the effect when the states that group the vape devices with drug paraphernalia. What were the results of that? I mean, is that for across the board for adults and youth, or do you know?
Ma'am, I honestly could not speak intelligently on that. I just was looking for data to be able to present for the state of Kentucky to kind of emulate and to follow suit with. I would imagine that presented some pretty good results of a deterrence, especially from the parents and guardians of these kids that are thinking these devices are cool to have. So I would imagine it had a good impact.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Timoney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this presentation today. As someone who has had to deal with this issue administratively in a school-based situation, it is very, very challenging. I'll go ahead and tell you, though, that I left that line of work 5 years ago. And from that point till now, the problem's exploded. And my question was answered already about is the possibility, are we looking at drafting legislation here? I will tell you that I think that every dollar that we put into looking at increasing consequences for these offenses, we also need to put equal amount into educating our parents on what these things are. I can tell you that, like I said, I mean, I have pretty good experience with this, but this technology is changing so fast. I remember having conferences with parents and they're like, oh, it's just flavored vapor. No, it's not. And that was a predominant response from parents. There's a big education piece that would need to go in lockstep with any type of increase in consequence, which I support. I know the school district that I worked for has been struggling with this. I'm a big believer in local control, but I think at this point, in order to get a handle on this, we do need to be a little bit more intentional from a statewide level and start ratcheting up the consequences. So I would be more than happy to sit down with a group and work on this. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Senator Meredith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the presentation, and certainly this is a problem that's been growing over the past few years, and I'd support any legislation that would hopefully curtail this. What I'm concerned about maybe is what may be missing from the process, and I think about the report we heard back in August from the student mental health initiatives, and they had gotten together and talked about what we need to do to address these mental health issues. Also read an article, editorial piece this weekend, where a young man promoted that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. But then I'm also thinking about the statistic I heard 3 or 4 years ago that human brain development in 1900 brain was fully developed at 18 years of age, and today it's 25. We're not allowing kids to grow up. They're not accepting consequences for their actions. So I know that's a long preface to what I want to make is I'm curious of what young people have to say about this. It's great that we can pass laws, but if it's our laws, it's not going to have a whole lot of ownership among young people. Surely we've got some cadre of young people that understand this is a serious issue, and I'd like to kind of give it back to them and say, what are you going to do about it? If you want to be have the responsibilities of an adult, then you've got to act like an adult. And I'd be curious if we put together a task force of some of our best and brightest, and we know they're out there, is just tell us, how do we address this? What do we need to do? So just point of consideration.
Excellent idea.
Seeing no further questions, we appreciate the presentation and the opportunity it's going to arise, I think, that with Representative Hart and some others to address the issue legislatively. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Our next presentation will be Improving Literacy Outcomes, the Importance of Home Libraries. If the group would please proceed to the table. And while they're getting there, I also want to thank Co-Chair Wise for the opportunity to serve with him in this capacity. He's been a mentor to me, and it's been a true privilege to serve with him. And also Rachel. Rachel wasn't an education person, but she stuck with me. But she's excellent with policy, and she's analytical with it, and she can dissect it, and she's been a true asset and a pleasure as well. So I wanted to make sure that I address those two. And with that, if you all would introduce yourself for the record, and you may proceed.
Push the light. Thank you for letting us be here to share with you today. I'm Rhonda Caldwell from the Kentucky Association of School Administrators. And because of your commitment to literacy, the work that you've done in this past year in our schools, it's an honor to introduce you to our longtime learning partners, our learning literacy partners since 2008. When it comes to literacy matters, including the science of reading, they are the go-to experts for me when it comes to key research and resources that I might need and can use for our school administrators here in Kentucky. Those types of resources and research that helps us guide our decision-making. And so with me today are Mr. Larry Holland to my left and Mr. Michael Hagan to my far left, and they are both of Scholastic, a company that started, many of you probably heard Scholastic. A lot of us think book fairs, but there is so much more since 1920. And they are still celebrating their 100-year anniversary. And so here today to share with you the research on the relationship between home libraries and literacy outcomes, but also the work that they are doing in other states, such as Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And so I'm going to start by asking Mr. Holland to introduce himself more thoroughly, as well as Mr. Hagan, and they'll take the presentation from there.
Good morning, everyone. So delighted to be with you. I'm Larry Holland, as Rhonda said. My responsibility at Scholastic is to oversee our state strategy work. I've been at Scholastic now 30 years. I started when I was 5. And my work at Scholastic, I'm happy to tell you, is informed by my 90-year-old mother, who's a PhD in education, and still tells me every day what I should be doing to make sure that the kids in this country are developing the appropriate reading skills that they need to be successful adults. I'm now also, on the other hand, guided by my sister, who is a retired Navy colonel, who's gone back to teaching, and now back in Louisiana teaching. So I have good guidance from Scholastic, from my mom, and from my sister, and I'm delighted to be here, and we'll share more with you shortly. I'll turn it to my colleague, Michael Hagan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Representative Huff. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Michael Hagan, a former teacher, principal, and district administrator. I had the pleasure of helping to bring back the schools in New Orleans after Katrina, and then leading a special school district in St. Louis, and then after that, being deputy superintendent and chief academic officer in Baton Rouge 7 years ago before coming to Scholastic. And I, like Larry, I started when I was 12. So this work has been incredible. I also had the pleasure of working with the last 7 years with Kentucky Association of School Administrators. As you said, Rhonda spoke about earlier, research-driven, research-based and research-informed instruction around literacy and what that does for children, teacher effectiveness, and achieving academics. So we have a presentation we want to show you briefly, and I have it on my screen here.
Mariah will come down and assist you. And members, you also have that in your packet as well.
There we go.
So again, we're very delighted to be with you. As Rhonda said, I come to you from Mississippi, and I'm very proud. I'm a very proud Mississippian. I lived in New York for about 25 years, but I've come back now to Mississippi in the last 17 years. And Mississippi has informed the work that we do at Scholastic. As you all, many of you know, we believe, broken the barrier in trying to figure out what to do about the fact that for the last many years in this country, 60% on average of our kids are reading below grade level. And we have all, across states, you in Kentucky have had great work, I think, done in this regard. We've all been trying to figure out what to do about this because it's just unacceptable that in a country as great as the United States, that we consistently turn out 60% of our kids reading below grade level. We have to figure out what to do about this. We think that we have broken the code a bit in the country, and one of the most important things that we've learned is that we must have science-based informed curriculum, and that curriculum must be implemented with fidelity, but it also must be led by well-trained and well-prepared teachers. So at Scholastic, we've identified 4 things that we believe are critical to us after 100 years at this ourselves, critical to us across the country, improving literacy outcomes for our kids. Those 4 things are, as I said, a science-based curriculum. You guys are making great progress in this regard. We are in Mississippi as well, and across the country, we see progress in this regard. It's hard to understand why we didn't always understand this, but now we have, and we're making progress. The other is having highly effective teachers. Without teachers in place to implement those curricula, we don't stand a good chance of being successful. In Mississippi, one of the things that we've done, and you all are following this as well, is that we insisted that every elementary school teacher in the state of Mississippi be trained in the science of reading. We're now on our 2nd round of training for those teachers. So we're very proud to say that you can step into any elementary classroom in Mississippi and you will find a well-trained, prepared teacher in regard to literacy skills. But we think there are 2 other things that we're leaving on the table. A lot of places are focused on rigorous curriculum and ensuring that we have highly effective teachers, but there are 2 more things that we believe could be helpful. One of them is a little more complicated. The other we think is pretty simple. The first is we need to make sure that we're fully engaging families in this process of literacy development. Kids are with their families more than they are in school. And that time with families, if guided with good advice from educators of what families can do, even if those families themselves may struggle with literacy, we know that there are things we see in the science, that there are things that we can advise parents to do, advise families to do that can support their kids' literacy development. And then the last thing that we believe we can do to ensure that we have better outcomes, which we believe is the simplest that can be done, is to ensure that all kids are surrounded by a literacy-rich environment. I would bet that every one of you can think right now about when you were a child, the books that you read that were your favorites. We have too many kids in our country today who don't have that experience. They either live in book deserts, or have never owned a book, or don't have access to books at home. We've done a better job of including books in our classrooms and building classroom libraries. We could still do better. But the home for most of our kids, especially those 60% of the kids who are reading below grade level, are absent books that give kids the ability to both practice the skills that they're learning in school, but also develop that joy of reading that we believe is critical to becoming lifelong learners. We can teach kids the science of reading, but we must also help them develop the joy of reading. We think that's critical. And if we can surround kids, both at school and at home, with a literacy-rich environment full of books that they both enjoy and want to read, and we know from the science want to read over and over again, they're not only developing and practicing the skills they need, but they're also at the same time developing that joy of reading that we believe is really critical. And so what we want to talk to you about today is what we at Scholastic have learned about number 4, the simplest thing to do, creating a literacy-rich environment for kids at home. We must also do it at school, but home in particular. And so my colleague Michael Hagan is going to take us through what we know about the research related to home libraries and why we think that's a critical thing that we can do simply and should do quickly. Thank you.
Building a culture of literacy is important, as we all know. And when you're talking about building this culture of literacy, you want to have a little research behind it. And so the research shows that when children are exposed to relevant texts, high quality texts, their chances of increasing including the country, the world, the entire world is experiencing these learning disruptions. And the learning disruptions has brought down our test scores all around the country. Our proficiencies are lower. So research has shown that when you have more books in the home, academics go up. Their proficiencies go up. But not just any books. They should be high quality books, relevant texts. We also show that when families grow up with more books, not just in the United States, but around the country, research is showing that achievement is going up as well. As few as 20 books in a home help students to achieve higher levels of education. And with those levels of higher education leads to when they get into colleges and when they get into their careers, when they start coming out of school, they're more successful. And actually, research has shown that those families start to show higher incomes when we're completing. So we took a look at the Read to Succeed Act. Already, the work has been done here in Kentucky. Reading instruction that's aligned to standards. You know what you're looking for students to know by a certain grade level, what that should look like. Teachers understand that. They deliver that in their instruction. So when you align those standards, it would be great to have, once they leave the classroom, books that are aligned to that as well. And so that's what this program does as well. And then engaging those students, especially research shows that there's something called a decline by 9. When students reach the age about 8 or 9, they stop reading as much independently. So the teacher who normally has them in her first grade, second grade, third grade classrooms normally have them do a read aloud and come sit on the carpet. That changes when they get to about the third and fourth grade. And so students start reading independently. So getting them on grade level by reading on grade level by third grade is important. So having those books in the classroom and then coming home sharing them as well is really highly important. And then what does it look like for teachers? Our teachers are tired. They're pushing and they're pushing. They have a lot of work. How can that work be made more simpler for them? What if they had instruction in the classroom and then when the students got home, it could be followed up with high quality text as well? But when it comes home, the parents don't want to see this massive amount of work. They would like certain tips. Maybe they're working 2 jobs and then have to come home and cook dinner. What if they have something where they can engage the child in reading with a few tips that share with them, as well as it supports the teacher in what they're doing in the classroom? And so again, aligned to the Reading to Succeed Act, providing high quality libraries and media programs is already a part of the act. What this does is creating those extensions to that learning, this culture of literacy, to having those libraries at home. I love that it engages all stakeholders. We know in order to build a culture of literacy, we know the teachers are doing the work. We know that the principals are supporting them. The school level administrators are there. Well, what happens when you engage the families? That achievement goes up. And Krashen talks about in his research, the single factor most highly involved with student achievement is independent reading. Regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of where the students are coming from, independent reading increases student achievement higher than any other thing. So those students get a chance to say, hey, this is what I like to read. I talked to you earlier about that decline by 9. Well, you get to engage those students with high quality text. So they're reading in the classroom, they come home, they're building their libraries at home. Now the families have some meaning for it and support in working with those teachers and administrators at the school. So now we're creating what we call this culture of literacy.
So what we're proposing today is that you consider here in Kentucky institutionalizing the theories that we're sharing with you, and that is institutionalizing home libraries for kids. You have a lot of kids who can't, and families who can't figure out how to do that for themselves. Either they don't have the resources, they don't have the availability of books in their communities, or they just don't know what to do. So by considering this as something that you do at a state level, we think that you can begin you would be supporting the work that you're already doing. Michael mentioned that independent reading is something that we know is critically important for kids. Well, in the literacy block in most states, there's just not enough time to get that 20 minutes a day of independent reading that we know is critical for kids to have if they're going to see or improve their literacy outcomes. And so by adding the home as a component of the planning that you're already doing, we think that you will see great success. We already know that this is true because we've done this work in places like Florida, Louisiana, Tennessee, where we have supported the development of a home library program for those states at the state level that allows kids who are reading below grade level to receive books delivered at home, curated by educators who understand what they need, what their reading levels are, what their interests are, supported in most cases by us as a publisher. But the important thing is the model. It's not necessarily the who does it, but the model. And so in Florida, as an example, which something we're very proud of. I'm very proud of. About 2 years ago, we went to the Speaker of the House in Florida, who had suggested in his opening remarks when he became Speaker that literacy was going to be a critical priority for him as Speaker. And Florida had already begun to do work, as you have, in this regard, but this was something that they hadn't considered. So we went to him and suggested that a very simple thing to add to his agenda in regard to literacy improvement was the creation of a home library program. At the time, Florida had about 540,000 kids reading below grade level. And so the thought that we would cover all those kids in a program was a bit daunting, both to us and to Florida, but they did it. That legislation was passed about a year ago. It created a program of sending books to kids once a month at home who are reading below grade level. Those books are published in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole because as we looked at the population of the most needy, those languages were the other two languages were highly represented. And we wanted to make sure that the program provided access to all kids. A year later, we're proud to say that all those kids who were participating and families who are participating, because in addition to the books they get family support, that we're getting rave reviews from the kids and the families about this program. And we believe that we're seeing increased practice of reading and a greater joy of reading by the kids who are participating in the program. In Louisiana, we've just, my actual original birth state, we've just passed legislation in Louisiana to create a similar program. It's slightly different. And the scale is way different. Florida had 540,000 kids. Louisiana has 150,000 kids who are reading below grade level. So the intent in Louisiana is to cover all kids pre-K-5 to ensure that they have the ability to develop home libraries. So we're going to begin in the next several months a program of shipping books to kids at home in Louisiana who are reading below grade level pre-K, from pre-K to fifth grade. That program will include very robust family support. One of the things that was important to the legislature in Louisiana as we worked through this program development was the fact that they have quite a challenge on adult literacy. And we know from a program that we work with called Reach Out and Read that's been around for 30 years, does a similar thing with pediatricians. If you go to your pediatrician's office and they're a member of Reach Out and Read or a supporter of Reach Out and Read, during the well baby visit, the pediatrician uses a book to take the child through the well baby visit, and then they get to take the book home. From that data, we know that actually we see some increase in adult literacy as a result of that program because the families are taught how to engage with the book, and often pediatricians tell us that they see the families reading the books more in their waiting rooms than they do the kids. So we know that there's some ancillary benefits, and that was an important factor for Louisiana because adult literacy is such a challenge for that state as it is in many states. So that's really it in a nutshell. We think that this issue is really complex. It's a critical one. You guys are after it. A lot of states are after it. It does require a good bit of diligence on the part of states and departments of education and families to improve our literacy outcomes. But we think there's a really simple thing that you can do that will add to our ability to make progress. And that's building home libraries for kids who are reading below grade level, which often covers kids who are also economically challenged. So that's our thought for the day, and we'd be happy to take any questions about our theory, our research, our models.
Thank you very much for this presentation. As it was mentioned earlier, our students' performance test scores were released to the public today, and I know that administrators have been working tirelessly analyzing that data, and I'm looking for tools in the toolbox, and literacy is a major concern. And I don't think there's any denying that a print-rich environment offers the most opportunities for success. So I appreciate you bringing this forward today and giving us something else to think about. We do have several questions for you today. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you so very much. So I'd like to start out with, I am probably the biggest consumer of Scholastic products in this, up on this venue. I'm a special education teacher and in an elementary school. I'd also like to do a brief call out to my colleagues for the Read to Succeed bill. I am currently doing the letters training. And despite having a PhD in education, I'm realizing there's so much more I need to learn about how to teach reading. And it's just a phenomenal program. So shout out and just a thanks to my colleagues. I would like to push back a little on the statement about independent reading. What I have found for my children who cannot yet read or read very well, independent reading 20 minutes a day is not the best use of their time in the classroom. So yes, for children who can read, but then, that's just my experience. So I do have a thought for engaging parents and families if they have the books at home, a research-based methodology for building competency as a reader is something called dialogic reading. And dialogic reading is basically you use the book as a catalyst for having a conversation with your child, which I think is something that would be easy for families to understand. And if we do promote a program like this, I would hope that we could educate the parents, not what I'm doing, here's how to decode CAT, but more of how they as parents can do something that increases their students or their children's reading ability. My question is, how is what you're proposing the same or different than the Dolly Parton Imagination Library?
So I'll say a couple things about your comments. First, Mississippi also used letters. So we have seen great success. So I'm happy to hear that you're feeling the same way here in Kentucky. It's a great program and teachers really appreciate it. In regard to the independent reading, what I intended to say, so I apologize, is that we want kids to read independently for 20 minutes, however they can get that time. And by adding the home as a component, we stand a chance of getting to that point more easily. In Louisiana, I had great pushback from the educators on the education committees when we talked about this program who said, but what if they can't read? And our point of view here is that we would provide books that were appropriate for kids depending on their reading level, and we would certainly propose the same thing here. In regard to your question about the Dolly Parton program, we work in collaboration with the Dolly Parton program in terms of design and our approach. We're picking up primarily at once the kids hit school. Dolly Parton's covering age 0 to 5. So she gets them preschool and gets them used to books and engaged with books. We think you shouldn't stop once they get to school. Now we've got them in the flow. Let's continue that flow. And teachers, I believe that it's important to have kids with the literacy-rich environment all the way through school. And so we're covering up to 5th grade. We hope somebody will pick up from there and continue the theory.
Just a brief comment. So I thank you very much, if it's okay. Yeah, so some of my teachers are doing this a little bit when they do their monthly book orders. They get friends and colleagues to sponsor a child, and so they get to send home a book with a child every month, and the kids really love it. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I just want to also add for those students that are really managing their striving readers, what does go home with them is something for the family to say, so who's your favorite character? So what do you think is going to happen next in the story? Or if it may be a wordless book for our kindergartners because they're beginning to read. So it's given to them and sent to them in steps so as their reading grows. And we try to follow along with the scope and sequence for the state.
Senator West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions, one for Mr. Holland and one for Mr. Hagan. Mr. Holland, you alluded to the fact that Kentucky should be using a science-based curriculum for early literacy. Could you go into that a little further and maybe, in your learned opinion, what does that look like for us? What does science-based curriculum look like to you?
I'm actually going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Hagan, on that question.
He gets 2 questions.
Yes, sure.
I'll answer the first one. So just as the representative spoke on, the training starts with letters. So what happens is most teachers, when we're in the School of Education, we have courses in how to teach reading, but not necessarily the foundations, in particular around phonics and those 44 sounds and those over 160 phonemes. So when you're going through those letters training, which is in several parts, like a 10-part training, they begin picking up with what are those 44 sounds and how do we teach those sounds? What are those phonemes? What are those special sounds? What are those blends? How do we get those 5 foundational skills in a way that we're supporting students in a way that we hadn't looked at before? Instead of having them look at the picture and guess what the word could be, we actually teaching them about the words, those sounds, those sight words, adding those sight words, adding those phonemes, adding those, how do we increase comprehension? So based around science, meaning what is the best way to teach reading, is how the training starts, and for teachers to understand that and go back to their lessons instead of guiding the child through a reading. They understand that they need to teach these important basic foundational skills first.
Thank you. And my second question, you mentioned the process on the books, and obviously this will be targeted to a lot of low-income parents and kids. And you made it sound like we're talking, a physical book a month. Is it all physical books, or is there an opportunity, with ebooks, we can have an unlimited library, right? So is there an opportunity if we find out that the parents have proper technology, proper computers, is there the opportunity to just do a full ebook library?
I know you're going to get sick of me talking about Mississippi, but I'm so proud of my state.
No, you're
We're
fine.
actually working with Mississippi right now to come up with a model different than Florida. Florida is all physical books. Louisiana is all physical books. Tennessee is all physical books. We know that there's some benefit to that because kids, what we see in Florida in particular, because there's such a volume of these kids who've already become participants in the program, is getting, what we hear from families is getting that delivery that's addressed to them, that's their book, so they have something they own, is a really big motivator for them. So we want that as a component. But in Mississippi, we're actually working right now with them to create a model that includes all kinds of content, a variety of content, both digital and print, both books and magazines. So we want to provide as many formats as possible, and we think each state should develop a model that works best for them in regard to how we present the formats.
Representative Donahue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on a personal note, thank you for your leadership on this committee. And I really enjoyed this committee. Best of luck to you. Good morning, folks. Thanks for the presentation today. I really enjoyed it. Just a couple of comments, if I may. I noticed in the first slide you had 4 things up there, the curricula and the highly effective teachers and libraries and engaging the parents. But I think the number 2 should always be engaging the parents and engaging the families, because I think what we do is that we have parent-teachers conferences for the students. You know, have we ever talked about having parent-teachers conferences for the parents? You know, where you sit down and we discuss what's not working for you at home. What can we do to help us move forward? I know that conversation happens, but I really think we should focus on it as well, too. And I know there's been some conversation about books. This is wonderful, but it's also a deterrent. You know, if this thing's sitting on the kitchen table and there's a book sitting beside it, you instantly look at that book and it opens up your minds and your imagination. So please stay with the books. I agree with you 100%. Getting something in the mail, you know, you can get this thing in the mail, but I like to throw this thing as far as I could. But my thing is a book, handing that in your hand, and the romanticism of holding a book in your hand, and maybe I'm old school, but I still think it works. I think sometimes with technology, we get too far out there, and we can come back to reality, and I think having a book in your hand, getting something in the mail is going to be something that's going to be beneficial for folks. So thank you all very much, and keep up the good work. Appreciate you.
Just want to say one quick thing about that. We also know in the science and in our experience with these programs is that the physical activity of parents engaging with their kids through the book also creates more opportunity for them to bond. We see it, we know it, and all of us, I'll bet, had that experience in our families. We want that experience for all kids. I will go back to the format question for just a second. I am a huge advocate of rural schools. I think very often we are forgetting our rural communities and not doing nearly enough to make sure that we bring them into the current economy. But one of the downsides of that fact is that the availability of broadband and the availability of, therefore, the internet limits our ability to do digital book distribution in some parts of the country, in some parts of most states. So we think the physical book has to always be a component, even if we try other formats, if for no other reason than access.
I want to also thank you, Representative Donahue, for your kind words. We have quite a few more questions. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you will indulge me, I do have a couple of questions. This is a topic I'm kind of interested in.
I'll indulge you for a little while.
I appreciate
But
that, Madam Chair.
make it quick.
I will. This is a topic that literacy is a topic I've been working on. Of course, Senator West, sponsor of Senate Bill 9, Representative Bojanowski and myself championed that in the House. Been working on this for about 4 years. When my members are probably tired of me talking about Mississippi too. Back in 2013, when really I think the law was started, how long did it take before the state started to show improvement, and how has that gauged over time?
So I'll say there's so many things to say about that. So the bill was passed, initial bill was passed in 2013. I want to say, as a observer and a consultant to Mississippi through my work at Scholastic, and a personal friend of Dr. Carrie Wright, who was our state superintendent for 9 years, a critical factor, by the way. So her ability to lap herself regularly is one of the reasons we've seen success. The first thing that we did in Mississippi was train the teachers. That was the most important thing that they had to do. That took about 2 years for them to get the program up and running and implemented. And I would say, and I think the data shows this, that we began to see the results shift after about those first 2 years. So it takes time. Absolutely, it takes patience. But I think the consistent leadership across the department was really critical. In addition to, obviously, we enshrined this in legislation, and as importantly, we funded it.
Thank you. And that kind of leads into some comments that I have. Our K-Prep scores were released publicly 12:01 today, if anybody was up and interested. I want to share a little bit. I haven't had a chance to dig into them much, but the percent of students statewide that were reading proficient and distinguished, all students, was 45%. White was 49%, and West Troubling Black was 24%. Math scores, all students were 38%, white 43%, and math were only 16%. Now, everybody in public needs to understand, these numbers have an asterisk by them because of COVID. There was a lot of learning loss during that time, but we do have a baseline now to evaluate going forward. And I'm hopeful that we can use this year, in 3, 4, 5 years from now, really look and see where we are and what improvements we've got from the Read to Succeed Act. My second question goes, we're focused right now on the current teachers in the classroom, but I'm also concerned about the teacher training programs. And what work have you seen, and what can be done to improve the teacher training programs at our universities so these teachers are prepared when they come in the classroom initially?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is beginning what you all are doing now, is beginning at letters training. So that letters training can be in partnership with the universities and sharing with them, here's what we're working with our teachers after they've finished their school. Because you're going to be working with your new teachers, first-year teachers, second-year teachers, as well as your veteran teachers, all doing the same training. And so what's happening around the country is they did it in Alabama, they're doing it in Florida. They're starting partnering with the universities and sharing what that letters training is looking like. And with that, what it's looking like, how can schools better support in their how to teach reading classes. We don't have certain classes that are offered in universities anymore around reading. And so in working with legislators, it would be great to share that with them. What can we look at differently in what we offer in our School of Educations to support students before they get to the classroom as teachers? And so that conversations have to happen. We're doing the same thing in New York. Sure. We did the same thing in Michigan. It's not as happening as great as I would like to see it, because what's happening now is we're spending the money afterwards doing the letters training and other trainings. And so the more we're having conversations with the universities, the more we're sitting down at the table with them prior to purchasing this new training, I think the greater the outcomes will be.
Okay, I have one very important question left.
Uh-huh.
Madam Chair knows
Proceed.
me. Madam Chair knows me. Besides serving on the Education Committee, I'm also on the Appropriations and Revenue Committee. So it all comes down to the finances. How much would it cost to initiate a program and sustain it that you're proposing in Kentucky? Do you have a rough idea to give us?
You won't be surprised to hear this answer, but it depends. It depends on so many factors. How many kids do you have that you're trying to serve? Are you serving those kids who are striving readers only? You're serving all kids? What grade levels? So the number of kids is the most important factor. Then how many books and how frequently? So, for example, in Florida, we send a book a month. The legislation in Florida allows us to send more than one a month, but we've chosen to start with one to get the program up and running. In Louisiana, we're going to ship quarterly. So it depends. I hate to leave you with that answer, but it depends. I will say volume matters. We have, even in the world of supply chain issues, which we face in publishing, just like everybody else, and have, when we can predict a higher volume further out, that can certainly improve pricing.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. And Larry, Senator West is also a big cattle farmer if y'all want to talk after the meeting.
You're finished. Thank you. Representative Decker. I think she noticed. Did you get your mic? Try it. Just get that one.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you all for your presentation. I, too, am very interested in the topic of literacy. I'm a lifelong lover of books, and I have always appreciated Scholastic, looked forward to the fairs. It was like magic when you ordered books and they came in, and it certainly helped me become a lifelong lover of books. Was Scholastic the company that produced the SRA reading boxes? You familiar with that?
Years ago.
Well, yes, a long time ago.
Yes.
When I was in elementary school in southeastern Kentucky, we got these, I've seen them described as boxes of gloriousness with various levels of reading that you worked your way through. And again, I appreciate your company and all that SRA and Scholastic meant to me in education. I understood you to say that it takes about 2 years to see the progress here. And I'm wondering if you could share some of that data with this committee as a follow-up.
So as I said, one of my responsibilities at Scholastic is to work with states around the country, and we have quite a good relationship with most departments of education. I am happy to work with Rhonda to respond to that request as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And then my final question has to do with, you've talked about we are shipping. You're proposing this as a proprietary program from Scholastic. Is that correct?
So my colleague will not hear this reaction. I just want this to happen around the country. I'm the old guy at Scholastic these days. I've been around for 30 years, and I am nearing the point where I'm going to go take care of my cattle as my only thing to do. And as I think about that, this is a legacy I'd like to leave, which is that across this country, all kids have at their homes libraries that are relevant and interesting and appropriate for them. So I just want it done. Now, I can tell you why you ought to do it with us. We're the largest distributor of children's books in the world. And because of our book fairs business and our book clubs business, which you referenced, and our magazine business, we see every single day what kids are reading. We know when they have choice, what they choose. So as a result of that, we think we're the best to curate the list of books and provide a wide range of books to kids that will help make this idea come to fruition. But at the end of the day, we just want kids to have more books, whoever provides them.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And have to say, I was born in New Albany, Mississippi, and I still have a lot of family there in Senatobia and Pontotoc, and I was just down there for the harvest that's going on right now. But I have a question: is that who screens the books that you guys send out? And then one, I guess, for Mr. Hagan, is how do you get parents more engaged? Because that's been a big problem, getting them to show up for parent-teacher conferences and stuff.
I'll take how we screen it, and I'm going to give it both those questions to Mr. Hagan because it's his team that curates our books for the entire process. So it depends. It varies by state and by program as to how the approval process works. In Florida, as an example, we curate the original list. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is because we actually, as a distributor and a publisher, we see all children's books from all publishers. for our book fairs business and for our book clubs business. So we use all of that information to come up with books that meet the criteria set out by the state. So we would look at here in Kentucky, we'd look at your standards, we'd look at your approved, if you have an approved list already, and then either enhance that or choose from that to make recommendations by grade, knowing what we know about the grade level, the reading levels of the kids, and also about the cultural interest of kids, and the language requirements of kids. We propose a list of books to Florida. They review that list and approve or not. Of the 1,000,004 books we've distributed so far, they've only asked us to change 4 books. So we're pretty good at this, and that's the process we would recommend, but it really depends on how you write the legislation.
And just to add to that, we actually, and I read every single book that we send to the Department of Education in Florida, as well as what we send to Tennessee, as well as what we send to other organizations that we do the similar kind of work with. And because I think that's important that we know the book. So what we do is we write annotations for each of those books, and we share that with the Department of Eds around the country so they can know what they're receiving in hopes. Because as Larry said, I have the pleasure of going around the country and working with districts all over the country and hearing from kids, walking into classrooms, doing read-alouds, taking the actual books, sitting with the students, reading to them, getting their reactions. And so that's critical for us because we want to make sure that you are asking how do we engage families. What we want to happen, and Larry talked about this, when that child receives that book and they open it up, we want joy. To talk with the kids afterwards, to ask them, what do you like about the program? What do you like about the books? And then ask the parents and get a 97.3% satisfaction that they love the books, they love what they're receiving. It's critical. What we did hear from feedback from the families were the bookmarks that we do, we give tips on them. They wanted them a little more kid-friendly. They looked a little more to the parents than they did to the kids. And so we found that really engages them when the parents have something that their child has that they're able to do the work with. So we also created something that we call literacy events. So we want the schools to understand, and the teachers, how do we best engage families as well? So having the families come out for these literacy events, talking about literacy, how do we create this culture? What does it look like when the book comes home, when they open it up? What does it look like to reread a book? What does that mean to the family to hear that? I'm from Ukraine and I don't speak English. How do I engage my family? So what does it look like to ask questions that you may have not have thought of even if you can't read the book? So all of those tips, all of that advice we have through our literacy events, we have through our literature that we send home. We put something together called a welcome kit. And in that welcome kit, each family, whatever language they want it in English, Spanish, or Haitian Creole for Florida, supports them in how to get started with the program. What it would look like for the first quarter, what to expect mid-year, what to expect when summer comes, because that's huge, because there's a large amount of time where they're out of school. And we want something called that summer leap. We want them to have that advantage of having books in the home, a collection of those books, and rereading them and getting ready for the new school year. So engaging those families through that process all the way through, making it not where they're like it's a heavy load and they're receiving something that's like homework, but they enjoy it and they know that their child look forward to receiving those books with.
Might I add on the family engagement? We actually have a division at Scholastic that focuses specifically on family engagement as a division. As I said. And one of the people who has informed our work in family engagement, and some of you may know her, is Dr. Karen Mapp, who is a professor at Harvard and has spent her entire professional career focused on how to engage families more. And her theory is pretty simple. It's more about the educators feeling that parents can and want to be engaged. If we can make that shift in thinking of the educators, we can do a better job of engaging families. But to Michael's point, we also have a lot of science behind what do families need to be able to feel capable of engaging. Those are the families we're most after, and that's what we're designing for.
Thank you, Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hoff. Mr. Hagan, Representative Bojanowski started by saying she was going to push back a little on what you said. I'm going to begin by saying I'm going to push back a lot. There's just no substitute for parental involvement. When I heard you say that parents need shortcuts, and I'm quoting you, in order to read to their children, I almost started to interrupt you right then and there. I see Julie in the background. I know my wife at the time and I would read to our children every night. And on those nights we got tired, we would read to our children every night. And on those nights we got really tired, because I had been working all day, either as a lawyer or as a teacher, and she'd been working at KET, we read to our children. So you have to engage the parents. There's no ifs, ands, about it. Representative Donahue was right. His initial his initial point was, you have to always engage the parents. He's absolutely right about that. And you're talking to someone, as I tell my Senate colleagues all the time, who's a former PTA president. So I've been in the trenches, working with parents and their involvement in schools. So I just disagree with you. I want to go to Senator Wilson's point about, what do we do? And Senator Wilson, I got an idea that I'm doing here. I've made no secret again to my Senate colleagues that I'm a strong proponent of the HANDS program. It's my favorite social program here in America, the HANDS program. And I've been meeting with the HANDS director in Fayette County. And next month, after the election cycle is over, I'm going to start going on my HANDS visits again. They had stopped during COVID, but I'm going to start going on them again. And one of the things I want to do with the HANDS program, Senator Wilson, is that in addition to them teaching parents how to bathe children and how to clothe children and how to feed children, I made it clear that I want them to start a process of how to teach children how to read and make reading an integral part of the HANDS curriculum. I think that's one way that we get children who parents and participate in the HANDS program involved. Because I think, and I'll be glad to have you respond, Mr. Hagan, I think, and I'm quoting you now, when you're talking about focusing on children who, one, are reading below grade level, and number two, who come from families who are economically challenged, to expect them to do reading independently, I think that's a folly. I think that's a folly. I think you need definite hands-on, definite strong involvement, definite platforms to engage those parents. Now, I'll give you a chance to respond. But my question is for you, Mr. Hagan. But I just got to tell you, I just think what you were proposing needs more substance than just this is going to happen through independent reading.
So if I gave the impression, obviously, of parents shouldn't be engaged. That's not the impression I want to give. I totally and absolutely, in all of my work that I've done as an educator in classrooms, in the schools, in the district for 22 years, families have to be involved in order for that to build that cultural literacy, is what I thought I said as well. Independent reading doesn't just happen because you give a child a book and you say, read independently. It starts with whole class instruction. The teacher has a whole class instruction. She's reading to the child. She has in a literacy block what she's doing. And then she moves into that small group. While she's in that small group, she's teaching skills. She's teaching skills to the students in her small groups based on where they are. While she's teaching skills to her small group based on where they are, other students are doing either independent work or they're working on digital devices or other things are happening. And then they're rotating. The skills that she taught them in that small group, we hope that the students takes those skills and now they have those skills to use independently while they're doing independent reading. So based on where they are, not just any book, but based on where the child's needs are and where the child is reading is. And that's how we look at independent reading, how we build those skills. Based on the skills she taught them in a small group, coming from that tier 1 instruction from the whole class, and then that tier 2 instruction supporting the students where they are, taking those skills as a student and now independently having a book that I can read. Then taking that same skills that I have and going home with those family members, doing just as you and your wife did, reading with their child, reading again with that child. And so eventually it gets to the point where the child now is able to read on their own. Now the child has developed these skills that were taught in the whole class, taught in a small group, received from those independent skills, and now they're able to start reading independently more than they were before. Students that have a love for dinosaurs, they can tell you everything about dinosaurs in the world. Some of those students may have a challenge in reading and other vocabulary. That doesn't mean that they can't read independently a book about dinosaurs. They actually do quite well in getting those skills. So I like for students to have it all, have that support from their family members, have that support from their teachers, and read it independently.
As I said, my question's for you. In addition to the advancements and changes we've seen in Mississippi, I always want to point out, and we had this debate when we had the Senate Bill 9 legislation this past year. In 2015, Mississippi passed universal pre-K. So in addition to the Read to Succeed Act, Mississippi has universal pre-K. And so, and we don't have that here in Kentucky. And again, my Senate colleagues know I've been a strong advocate for that. How important was that in terms of moving the needle for Mississippi, in addition to the other changes in legislation and policy that you're talking about today?
I'll start the response, and then Larry, I'm sure he's going to want to state. For universal pre-K was important, in particular for Mississippi, because of the exposure it had for family members in working with their child and the teacher alongside before they entered kindergarten. That transitional kindergarten period in pre-K, what they exposed them to. I talked earlier about wordless books, starting there. The pre-K program that they started in Mississippi, actually, they worked with several organizations in bringing that together and looking at the curriculum that would take place, how they would do it, looking at mom and pop organizations for pre-K, looking at what would take place in the schools, how do you introduce those to the classrooms, and then moving to kindergarten. They looked at pre-K very differently than kindergarten, which they should have, and preparing those students before getting them kindergarten ready. So I think that had a lot to do with the training that took place for their pre-K teachers as opposed to their kindergarten and K-5 teachers.
I think the most, and maybe your questions were directed at me. I was sorry for that.
The latter question was definitely directed at you.
Okay. This is Mr. Hagan. I'm Larry Holland. And so what I'd say about Mississippi is that there's no simple answer. And you all know this here in Kentucky. You've been at this just as we have. And you're going to make just as much progress as we've made. But there's no single thing that we can point to in Mississippi to say, this was the thing. I did say earlier that of the things we did, training teachers was critical. And I have observed that. But that's also what Carrie Wright, who was the champion of this effort in Mississippi as the state superintendent, says whenever she talks about the progress made in Mississippi. I do also want to go back to the issue of family engagement. If you'll recall in our very first slide, we think that there are 4 things. We didn't weight them in their importance. One of those 4 things, critically important, is family engagement. We believe wholeheartedly in family engagement, but we also believe very strongly, Senator Thomas, that you have to meet parents where they are. Just wishing that they were, or wishing that they could or would, has not gotten us anywhere. We have to meet them where they are, and that's what we believe is critically important. But that is one of the 4 pillars that we described to you earlier in the presentation.
Right. And that's why I'm a strong believer in the HANDS program, because you go out and you meet the parents where they are. I completely agree with that, Mr. Holland.
Senator Southworth.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question, and some of it's halfway gotten answered among several others, so I'm going to try to condense it down here. But first, I'm going to mention I did take a check around the room. I am the youngest senator, but I'm not the youngest in the General Assembly, but I think I'm still the youngest on this committee. And I am totally against screen time for kids. My very first session, I came out with a bill to reduce screen time. I think psychologists, the science is all there. I think the idea of digital libraries is really not cool at all. They certainly have plenty of screen time, and there's not enough. Well, science is all there. Anyway, pulling stuff off the screen to actually retain and all those issues, I think printed books is the way to go. It's been the way in the past, and it's in the way in the future. But relating to the Imagination Library, it's not a secret. I'm fairly underwhelmed by that program. And one of the things that I don't really care for, one particular comment got made recently was, well, we want all the kids to have the exact same books so they can all talk about them and have some kind of shared camaraderie, I guess. And I think that's terrible. You know, the last thing we really need is all of our kids talking about the same movie or the same TV or the same book instead of having actual human engagement. And so I think having the different books, and I'm going back to the book fairs when I was a kid, and I'm just wondering, is the idea here, you mentioned a curated list, is the idea where we're going to pick a book that month to send to the kids that score, 26th percentile get this book and the 27th percentile get that book, or all of these books meet all the kids so they choose whether they want dinosaurs, sharks, or trucks? I mean, how does that give the students some choice? Or they go to the book fair and the school says you can choose any book up to $9.95. I mean, I'm just wondering, what does this really look like? How do we get kids engaged and make sure we're hitting the right ones?
So here we get to the complexity of trying to create a program that works for the volume of kids that we're talking about. I'd say first, we believe if we could wave a wand, we would always give kids choice. Now, the list of books that they have to choose from would be curated so that they're appropriate, they're age appropriate, grade appropriate, reading level appropriate. But if we could give all kids choice, we would be in nirvana at Scholastic. But logistically, that's hard. So in Florida, 540,000 kids, and we got to deliver books once a month. So the lag time of getting them to make a choice and then turn around and deliver that book is just complex. And so what we've done in Florida, different in Louisiana, different in Tennessee, but in Florida, we allow the family to tell us the genre that the kid is most interested in, their child is most interested in. And then Michael's team does this, so he can speak to it much better than I can. We then have a selection of books available within the genre, and then choose for the child out of that genre what they might receive. But we definitely don't want all kids getting the same book.
So it's really a theme that they look at. For example, fun and adventure, animals, and anything that you can think around a theme, and books are placed within those themes, and there are actually several books within each theme. So the student gets to select a theme, and then a book comes to them. So any household, any community could receive up to 1 of 9 different books, in other words, each month in different languages. So it's impossible, it's not impossible, but quite difficult to say of all the books we have to choose from. So what we do is, as you heard earlier, we have the books that we send to the DOE. We have those approved first, and then once they all go on that list, and then we put them within those, they're already within the themes, then the students select the themes, and that's what goes home to the families.
And I might make a case for digital for just a second. I know I might be stepping into a hornet's nest with you on this one. One of the reasons Mississippi is considering adding digital books to the mix is because we can give kids choice with digital. It is the beauty of the technology, and it is the curse of the technology. But we are able to give, it's easier for us to give kids choice on a digital platform. You still have the issue of access.
Yeah, no argument on the access or the ease. I suppose the issue, I think, as you mentioned, was ownership. In, do we believe in parents buying I don't know what they even use anymore, Kindle book or whatever for each kid, or do they have to share, And then if you're all sharing one computer, when I was a kid, now your 30 minutes is up, So obviously want them to have books. The only other thing I'll just throw out there as a final comment, the wordless books really actually has me worried, and I'm not going to spend my time on that, but I'm thinking back when I'm 4 years old. The books had all these words in them, and granted, I was learning how to read them, but I didn't know all the words, but that's the point. And I just think even if it's cat in the hat, you should at least have cat and hat on the page. And while we see the cat with the hat, I just don't see at it really any age, why not stick a word on there? I mean, it's helpful, right? It's moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I understood where you were coming from. In a perfect world, we would have parental engagement, but the reality is that we have grandparents raising children across the Commonwealth. We have foster parents that are at capacity. So I think it's time that we acquiesce to the fact that that's not going to happen in a large population. And so we need to look to other venues and other avenues to have print-rich environments. Thank you for your presentation. Our final presentation today is the revised Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. If those would make their way to the table. And I think we also have a presenter that is joining us remotely. And we'll please give her the opportunity to introduce herself as well. And while they're coming to the table, I want to thank my co-chair, Riley, who has left. Might I mention to everyone, if you could look right here, where he was. Anyway, he serves as co-chair with me in the House Education Committee, and he has been a huge mentor as well as and a sounding board, and so has Representative Lewis. He has kept me in check. He thinks that was his job, but I want to also give them, because we've kind of pulled together and had discussions regarding education, and they're a great source of knowledge in the education field, so I appreciate them as well. If you would, please introduce yourself, and you may proceed.
Good afternoon. I'm Rhonda Sims. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Assessment and Accountability at the Kentucky Department of Education.
And Mickey Ray. Mickey Ray. I am the Chief Academic Officer in the Office of Teaching and Learning at the Kentucky Department of Education.
Crystal Rowland. I'm the Director of the Division of Program Standards at the Kentucky Department of Education.
And thank you so much for accommodating me joining you virtually today. My name is Bertina Lemmer. I'm a Technical Assistance Consultant with the American Institutes for Research.
I'd like to thank Chair Huff and the rest of the committee for allowing us some space and time before you today. And we are going to begin in the spirit of the statute. We're going to start with a review of the standards process and then end with a discussion around the aligned assessment blueprint. And I'd like to, if we can go to the third slide. The standards revision process is established in KRS 158.6453, and the advisory panels and review committee, they become very familiar with the charge within that statute, and they use them as guideposts as they go through the process of standards review. The fourth slide has a visual that depicts the standards review process. And today we are at the top of that second column, and we have the final column to go in the work of the standards review process. And we do have the Standard and Assessment Process Review Committee meeting that will occur on November the 21st. And we're hoping to take the draft Kentucky Academic Standards for Science to the Kentucky Board of Education at their December meeting. On the next slide, we have the actual regulation numbers. This is the future regulation. This will be a new addition to KIR Chapter 8, where all of our standards documents now live. But I want to spend more time talking to you a bit about the timeline, the process for standards revision. And typically this takes about 2 years to complete. So when we call together the advisory panels, the review committee, it typically takes about a year for them to review the standards, respond to the public feedback, and develop a draft standards document. And then there's around 6 to 9 months for the legislative process that will follow. This process for science is a bit atypical. So you can see this was a lengthier process, but the advisory panel and review committee faced many challenges over the course of this review. Of course, we all have acknowledged the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but there were also committee members who faced challenges regionally with natural disasters. There's the Western Kentucky tornadoes, certainly the floods within Eastern Kentucky. So it took them a bit longer to produce the draft standards documents, but we are very thankful to be here today to bring forward that draft document. And just so so grateful to the commitment of the teachers and educators who serve on the advisory panels and review committee, who stayed committed throughout that process. And we did face some challenges. There were periods of time in which it was more difficult for us to have quorum. We also had some challenges with the teachers getting release time because they couldn't be away from their classrooms. There were substitute shortages. So this has been great work on their part to gather together the draft standards in response to 2 public comment periods to this point. There will be one final public comment period associated with the regulation and that statement of consideration. So we'll still have one other chance to respond to public feedback on these draft standards. And then lastly, before I turn it over to Dina, I want to talk a little bit about the guiding principles. So the advisory panels and review committee, they established 5 guiding principles, and they are aligned to 158.6453, but they're also specific to science. And I just wanted to call out specifically that 4th one. So I think it's obvious to all of us that students need sustained opportunities to work with the ideas that are connected across that K through 12 progression for science specifically. And we would say that for all of our standards documents. But this one I think is especially pertinent, that we're not just looking at science over a period of weeks and months, but that it is truly a part of the academic content knowledge that students experience through that K through 12 progression. So Dina, I will hand it over to you to talk about the rounds of public comment and the feedback that we received.
Thank you so much, Mickey. So again, following that process laid out in the revised statute 158.6453, the committee members really had the opportunity to look at 2 separate rounds of public feedback. The first round of feedback was conducted by the Region 5 Comprehensive Center. And as you can see, it was primarily teachers that responded, but we also had several administrators, parents, state education agencies, and then curriculum coordinators and things like that from the district. So once this report came in, we pulled the advisory panels and the review committee together to kind of go through all of that public feedback. And what they found was there were a total of 553 respondents that completed the survey. Not all respondents commented on all performance expectations. Most had no suggested changes from that first round of feedback. And of those, approximately 348 had no proposed changes. From those that did provide comments, they did so on average for a little over 5 performance expectations. As the advisory panels and review committee looked at this, they found that there quite a bit of the feedback was around clarification of standards. So throughout the course of their meetings, they produced another the draft of the standards that you see in front of you, and we conducted another round of public feedback with their proposed changes. Again, we saw quite a few teachers, both formal and informal teachers provided feedback, along with some administrators, parents, higher ed faculty. And then on this round of public feedback, we asked respondents to be able to, they could respond to each of those standards with keep, adjust, or discard, or agreeing with what the committee members were proposing in the draft standards, or if they had other feedback. And as you can see in K5, 87% of feedback really agreed with what the committee members had responded to or had recommended from the first round of public feedback. In middle school, 92% agreed with the recommendations from the committee, and then in high school, about 89%. We also had about 83% of respondents really agree or strongly agree that the new proposed layout that the committee recommended really helped to clarify the information that was within the standards. Additional feedback was sought with the second round over the summer. There were 7 focus groups that we held over the summer and fall of 2022, and those consisted of higher education science instructors, higher ed teacher prep groups, parents, organizations that support implementation, teachers, administrators, and a few students as well. Some highlights of this proposed, the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. The largest one is the redesign of the layout to really focus on one standard per page and really help clarify for Kentucky stakeholders what is within these standards. They are still on grade K-8 at grade level. So kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then sixth, seventh, and eighth have designated standards. And then high school is banded 9-12. And then we, of course, have 4 domains within the standards themselves. And those cover physical science, life science, earth and space science, and then engineering, technology, and the application of science. Here we just kind of have a visual of what this new proposed layout is. As you can see, and hopefully you agree with the public feedback that this really helps to clarify the information on the page. There are several components to the standards. At the top, you have the performance expectation, which is what students are expected to know and be able to do by the end of the year. The clarification statement provides examples and additional information for teachers. The assessment boundary is really for that large scale assessment boundary, the large scale test. And then we have the foundation boxes below that provide additional information for teachers about the practices, cross-cutting concepts, and disciplinary core ideas that are really pulled together to create these standards. And then in alignment with KRS 158.6453, in addition to the standards, we want to make sure that the assessment blueprint is really in aligned with the work that the committees have done. So the KDE Office of Assessment and Accountability, sorry, I haven't had enough coffee yet today. They utilized our the same advisory panel and review committee members to really dive into the assessment blueprint in conjunction or following along with the work that they were doing with the academic standards for science to really make sure that those pieces are in alignment. Similar with the standards, the assessment blueprint was put out for public feedback. We did also receive very similarly several teachers, both formal and informal, administrators, higher ed faculty, business community, and these were put out for 30 days. That survey opened on June 29th and closed on August 1st. And generally speaking, the feedback that we received or that the committee members looked at was majority similar. They enjoyed the feedback. They enjoyed the language of the document. There were a couple of requests for some additional information about items and helping teachers who might be using this document. And in response to that feedback, the committee members made a couple of recommendations to the assessment blueprint. And that was to add some additional language and hyperlink to some released items to help teachers kind of identify what a 3-dimensional assessment item might look like if they were using that document. The other change that the committee members recommended was to lower the boundary of earth and space science to 20% or so, basically to bring it into alignment with the high level of earth and space science items or earth and space science standards that are included in 5th and 6th grade as well, leading up to that assessment in 7th grade.
So that concludes our presentation. We're happy to accept any questions that you may have for us today.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I think that this is important to non-educators so they understand the process and how we reach the standards. We do have 3 different questions, and I'm going to cut it off at that because of time. First, we have Representative Givens-Prunty.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It's a daunting task, and I appreciate the input that's given and who it comes from. But I guess in looking at the numbers, they seem so small. How much is enough input? I mean,
I agree. We have utilized all of our media and communication mechanisms at the agency to ensure that multiple stakeholders are allowed to participate. That's also the purpose of our focus groups above and beyond the public comment period. But again, the more people that we have participating in the process, the more feedback that we're able to generate, the better the feedback to the advisory panel review committee to address those as we move forward.
okay, thank you. And just follow up, Madam Chair?
Quickly, please.
Just a comment on the members of the committees, the different committees. I think it would be good to have where they're from for the focus groups, the supporting organizations. administrators and district leaders and students. It was great to have it for the other people. I was looking to see if there was, if my district was represented, but it'd be nice to have those locations of those people, members as well.
And we can get that for you if it's not already in the binder. Do we have those listed in the digital binder?
Okay.
So within the digital binder, there should be descriptions of the focus groups and who was involved in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative McCool.
Thank you. My question goes right along with what the representative just mentioned. So you provided us the from the surveys, you provided the response and the percentage of the responses.
So, Representative, within that digital binder, there is one folder that presents the entire reports, both for the first round of public feedback and the second round. So what we can follow up and make sure that you know specifically where that is so that you have access to those reports and the feedback that was actually received.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Southworth.
Thank you. I had two questions. The first was about how the review committee members and the advisory panelists are selected, if there's like a rubric scoring or committee or how that works. And my second question is relating to the science proficiency scores. I recall recently hearing we were somewhere in the 30 percentile. I'm just kind of worried now if we're at 30% or 40 with reading, if science is working at, but going back to next generation science standards adoption, was it 2013 or 14 whenever we finally got that done? I'd like to see the scores before that and then during that, and obviously hopefully that's some kind of informed on this, but where I'm getting to there is I'm very concerned about our science education. I was not supportive of the next generation science standards to begin with. I did not support the legislation that said we should reduce the content. Choosing fewer topics to cover and claiming that they're going in depth means we're eliminating content. And we have already low proficiency levels. I think we need to raise the bar, not lower it. But anyway, I want to know if this has made the scores go up. That maybe it's an artificial go up, but I need to know that if it hasn't made them go up, then are we on the right track? Those are really my things around the actual standards themselves.
I want the standards, and I'll talk about it.
Sure, thank you. I'll begin with the questions around the committee makeup. So much of that is determined in 6453, but we do ensure that we have regional representation as well as a mix of urban, suburban, and rural representatives across our state. And within that digital binder, you can actually see the applications and the CASAB that's used as a rubric of sorts to select the membership of all of those committees.
And I'll talk a little bit about the data. Science performance is lower than reading and mathematics. That has been a consistent pattern. One of the complications is because of the interruption of testing with COVID, we don't really have a good direct link. You could go back and look at the few years together after the science standards got into place and were beginning to be instructed, and you could look at that set of data, and then we would have this break with COVID where one year we had no testing, one year we had very limited testing and a shorter test form, and then this year we had a more full experience of testing. And this year we are using the term Kentucky Summative Assessment because there's been quite a bit of changes to the tests themselves. So the idea, I think what you would like to see, Senator Southworth, is some sort of a very direct link comparison. I don't think that's possible technically, but we certainly can pull some data for you so that you can see kind of in blocks of what it was after the standards passed. And again, there's time, to move from getting the passage of the standards to actually getting them into the classroom and getting teachers accustomed to them, trained to use them, and working with students on them. So there's always some lag there as well. And it takes some time to produce the test to go along with the standards. That's about a 2-year process as well. But we certainly can pull some data for you. But the science standards the science performance is lower than reading and math. And, we have Representative Tipton has mentioned the test release that became public. And you can see the impact of the pandemic. People have put their best efforts forward, but that is a national pattern. As you look at national news, you're going to see the same pattern across the country as you saw here in the Commonwealth. And so it says we've got a starting point. We've got to move forward with that. And you've heard some exciting things today that maybe can help that and your good policy making as well.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today and giving us that overview of the standards. And thank you all of you that have joined us today in the committee members' indulgence. Our next interim joint committee on education will be held in 2 weeks on November the 1st at 11 a.m. Seeing no further business, a motion to adjourn? Second?